Last summer there was no space to read on my balcony, and this winter I've decided to do something about it and build the sofa. I started off this project with milling the lumber. I was very excited about this project and couldn't wait until my plans were ready. So me and my boyfriend, we started sorting through the boards and deciding which ones we are going to use. Then we cut off the live edges of those boards and cut them in half lengthwise. It's time to show you my cat model. So this sofa has two special features. One feature is the back legs. The back legs are curved, which makes them more comfortable to sit on. And this is something I've made for myself. I've wanted to incorporate more curved designs into my builds, and this is how I designed the legs. The other one is the armrests. We are limited in space, and I've wanted the armrests to be foldable, so I can fold them down if I want to lay on the sofa and fold them up if I need the space. The armrests are attached with hinges. With my plans ready, it was time to start thinking. At this point of the build, I am already deciding which part of the sofa is going to be produced out of which board. This is what you see me doing here. I am marking and numbering all my boards so I could make some cuts later. The reason why I've already decided which part of the sofa is going to be made out of which board is so that I can make some rough cuts and make them a little shorter, because it is going to be way easier to put them through the jointer and planer when they are not as long as they are right now. Here you see me making one of those rough cuts, and I am clearly struggling with the length of the board, and it's only good that they are going to be shorter very soon. During the process, I tried to get rid of some imperfections. I tried to get rid of branches, and I also tried to cut in strategic places so that the shorter boards aren't as bent as the longer ones. Some of my boards still had some rough edges, and I decided to get rid of them on the table saw. I could have used the jointer as well, but I was too lazy. Then it was time to put the boards through the jointer. Those boards are from a tree my grandfather once cut down, and I've had to be very conscious on how I'm going to push them through the jointer to get a flat result without losing too much thickness. Speaking of my grandparents, I have the best grandparents you can imagine. They have a big workshop and I can use it whenever I want. And it's amazing how many tools they've collected over their lifetime. Whatever I set my mind on doing, my creativity isn't limited. The tools are here. And whenever there's a problem, my grandfather has a solution. I started the building process with the back legs. This was the part of the build I was most nervous about, because I don't have a lot of experience with templates and routing, and the chance of something going wrong was the highest on this part of the build. Actually, my only experience with templates was a plant stand I made recently, and for this plant stand I needed double the materials than I would have if I would have gotten it right the first time. So I was quite nervous about those back legs because I didn't have had enough wood prepared for me to make everything twice. The boards for the legs I did cut to rough length so that they are ready for the glue up. I then glued my roughly cut boards together because I thought I needed a wider board to fit my template. For the glue up I've used those parallel clamps and some clamps in between, and I've made 4 boards ready for the template. And then it was time to clean those boards up. First I chiseled away all the big chunks of glue, and then I put the boards through the planer again. There's always this little seam in between boards I've wanted to get rid of, and my boards were as wide as the planer, so I've had to be quite careful in putting them through the planer, but everything fit. With my boards ready, it was time to make the template. I've printed out my paper template from this cat model, and then I've glued it on an MDF board. There are exactly 3 straight faces on this template. One is the top and one is the bottom, and then there is one face in the middle which is at a 90-degree angle to the top and the bottom. I first did make all the straight cuts on the table saw and then moved over to the bandsaw. On the bandsaw I did cut out everything else so that there would be very little sanding left to do once I've cut everything out. This is the moment I realized I messed up. As you see, the template fit on one board. It wasn't necessary to glue two boards together to make a wider one, and all this work was for nothing. Well, not totally for nothing. I was a little annoyed, but I realized that I can fit now 3 legs into one whiteboard, which means that I'm going to have 2 spare legs to try out and mess up, and still I'm going to have 4 nice legs, hopefully. And this is what I did. I did cut out all 6 legs on the bandsaw, and then I've used the first and ugliest one as a test piece for the routing. I used double-sided tape to attach the template, and then it was time to route. So for the routing I've had a little problem. I wanted my back legs to be 6 centimeters wide. I didn't had a router bit which would be able to carve out 6 centimeter wide wood. I decided to make 4 back legs, all 3 centimeters wide, and glue them together after the routing. I still didn't have a router bit which could carve out 3 centimeters thick wood in one pass, which meant that I've had to flip my piece over and route the little seam in a second pass. After the routing, it was time to glue both of my halves together. For the glue up, I didn't use any fixing components. I didn't use any dowels or anything else to fix the two halves together. So shifting was an issue I was aware of, but I didn't think as much of it. And the only thing I thought is I need clamps. So that's the reason you see so many clamps on the workbench. I was prepared to use as many clamps as possible, and that's what I did. I used all the clamps. It worked, but to use some dowels or something else to fix the two parts together probably would have been easier and would have reduced the stress during the glue up, but this worked. Because I used a lot of clamps, I've got a lot of dents too, and I got rid of those dents with water, and then I could start sanding. First I sanded everything with 80 grit sandpaper. I just wanted to get rid of all the dents, maybe there's still was a little seam left on the legs, and I just got rid of all those things with the 80 grit sandpaper. I then went back to the routing table and put a 45-degree chamfer on my legs because I thought this is going to look nice. I did consider a round over because it feels nicer, but I really like the looks of a 45-degree chamfer, and this is what I did. But I probably will experiment with round overs too. I have only one problem with round overs. They feel old. When we were kids, we've had those classic old pine beds where every edge was round, and every time I want to make a round over, I see those beds, and I see a lot of cool designs with round overs, and I don't think about those beds. But every time I want to use a round over, I instantly think about those beds, and I feel like it's going to look outdated, even though it's not. There are a lot of cool designs. Maybe I've noticed, but I didn't cut the ends of my legs because it was easier for sanding. But now the time came and I have had to do it. It wasn't easy because nothing was straight on those legs. There's this one 10 centimeter strip which is at a 90-degree angle to the top and the bottom. And I clamped this strip to my table saw slide and made my cuts that way. It felt a little wobbly, but it worked out well. Next, I've had to clean the ends up as well. I've used the hand plane to put a chamfer on all the edges, and then I sanded the top and the bottom. I feel like sanding acrylic is very frustrating and satisfying at the same time. It's frustrating because it takes long for such a small surface, but at the same time it gets really smooth, which is so nice. With the legs done, it was time for everything else. I started doing all the framing pieces for the frame of the sofa, the armrests and the backrest. I started out with cutting all my parts to the right width. I really struggle with making cuts lengthwise on the table, so all my cuts get curved, and this is the reason why I decided to make all the parts a little wider than they need to be in the end. I will put them through the planer again and straighten all the curves out I'm going to cut into the boards right now. And sometimes when making large cuts I should really think ahead, because this little circus move would have been avoidable if I thought before I made the cut. I didn't put anything behind the table saw and the board was going to fall down, but I didn't want it to fall down, so I've had to stretch. Here you see me putting my no longer straight boards through the jointer again and straightening all my curved cuts out. I know this is not the most efficient way of doing it, but I really don't know how I should have done it more efficiently, because I wasn't able to make any straight cuts. So I did it like this, and it worked out. The result is fine, it just took a little longer. My father had some spare time to help me while planing, which made at least the planing process a little bit more efficient. The question is if projects like this even need to be efficient, because I am doing those projects for myself and it's my time. I invest in my free time, it's my hobby, and maybe it doesn't have to be efficient at all. It's for my pleasure. I then put on a chamfer on all the parts and sides where I've wanted to have a chamfer. After that I cut all my parts to the right length. With that it was time to clean everything up. I've used the hand plane to clean up all the edges and sometimes put a chamfer on the edges, and then it was time for sanding. When sanding I try to make everything as nicely as possible before assembly, because I think it's way easier to sand something when it's not already attached to something else. And especially this piece, this is going to be the stretcher of the sofa in the front or in the back, I don't know where it went, but there's not going to happen a lot to it. With my framing pieces ready, it was time to make the slates, which are going to go inside of the armrests and the backrests. I've had one board left over, which was a little thicker than the other ones I've used for the rest of the parts, and I was going to use this one for the slates. I tried to get as much slates out of this board as possible. I first cut the board into rough length, a little longer than it needs to be in the end, and then I've cut it lengthwise. The cuts you see me making here are the width of the cuts are quite short, and I'm going to turn them, so the height of the board you are seeing here is going to be the width of the slate in the end. While I was cutting the slates, my father was already jointing them, which was very nice of him, thank you. Then I've put all my little slates through the planer. Then it was time to clean the slates up. I wanted the slates to have a chamfer on the sides, which I decided to make with the hand plane because I wasn't confident enough to do it on the router table. The slates aren't that wide and I just felt too close to my fingers, so I decided to make it with the hand plane. It took some time by hand, which is the reason why I sat down comfortably on the workbench and listened to some podcasts while doing so. But yeah, it was a nice job, it was comfortable. Then I've cut all my slates to length with the table saw. And with that, it was time for sanding. And I really wasn't looking forward to it because sanding all those slates individually would take a very long time. And I am going to sand enough for this project. I don't know at this point, but I will sand for days. But that's not the problem right now. So I made a little jig. I used a scrap piece of plywood and used it as a base, screwed some scrap wood on it and put all the slates in there. And with the jig I could sand all one face of all the slates at the same time, flip them around and sand the other face. And this was very efficient. There's only one little problem. The plywood sheet was not wide enough, and whenever I was sanding the part of the slates which is closer to my body, the slates were rising up and I was scratching the inside surface of the slates whenever I was going up with the sander again. So I've had to be a little careful, but it worked. The backrest is going to be attached to the frame with some eccentric screws and connector bolts. And for those I am pre-drilling the holes. The big hole is for the eccentric screws and the holes into the end grain are for the connector bolts. My boyfriend made me a little jig so I could drill all the holes at the right distance. We are getting closer to a very messy glue up and it was time to prepare for it. I decided to attach all my parts with the domino, and here you see me marking where I want to place my dominoes. For the bigger parts I've marked out every domino I want to place. On the slates I marked out a few and then I decided it is going to take me a very long time to mark those all and made another very ugly jig. The jig was very convenient. I didn't even have to clamp the slate down. I could only put the slate into the jig, rest my domino onto the jig, make my hole, turn it around and repeat. So it was very efficient. With the slates ready, it was time to prepare all the other parts. For the bigger parts, I used my markings and drilled the holes with the domino. I was very strategic about where I wanted to place a normal sized hole or where I wanted the slit to be a little wider in case I need to shift anything during the glue up. I also wanted to tell you that this domino is not my domino. It is the domino of my boyfriend's father and he was kind enough to borrow it to me for this project and I wanted to thank you very much. So for the glue up I wanted to give you some background about the glue. Especially the backrest has a lot of parts and they all need to be aligned and clamped down inside of the working time of the glue. And the wood glue we've had in our workshop had a working time of 8 minutes, which was fine for smaller projects and it worked very well for those projects, but even then it was stressful to me to align all the parts in this short time period. So I decided to go to our local supply store and buy another wood glue. I found a wood glue which had a working time of 25 minutes and I bought it and used it. And you see us here, we are gluing the backrest together with this new wood glue. It felt a little strange in consistency, but I didn't expect it to be the same as the other wood glue I used previously. The assembly went great. We were very well coordinated. Everything was prepared nicely, so there were no issues. And we've had it clamped in very short time. And then the disaster came. I didn't buy regular wood glue, I bought foaming glue and it foamed everywhere. All my nicely pre-sanded wood was full of glue. It was going everywhere, pushing out of every nook and cranny, and the holes I've pre-drilled were full of glue and I tried to clean it up, but this glue was so sticky I couldn't get it off and it was a mess. which meant for the other parts I've used the regular glue again. I was dumb enough to use the foaming glue for one of the armrests too, but after that one I've learned my lesson and used for the framing parts, and for the other armrest I've used my trusty old 8-minute working time wood glue, and it worked, and those parts came out very nice. While gluing together the framing parts, I was worried about the legs not being square, but this was actually no problem. I just put everything together, put on 2 clamps, and then the legs were at a 90-degree angle to the stretcher piece in the middle, so everything here went very smooth and very nice. After the glue up, it was time to get rid of the mess I've made with my glue choices. So I chiseled around the slates and got rid of the glue squeeze out, and the holes I pre-drilled earlier were also filled with glue. I chiseled out most of it with the chisel, and then it was time for sanding. The sanding part was actually very challenging for me. The parts that needed the most sanding were parts I couldn't reach with the machine, so I've had to sand a lot by hand, and I was sanding for days, so it took a lot of time, and it was very frustrating because the process was very slow, and I was most of the time alone in the workshop sanding by myself. It was very quiet, and this meant I've had a lot of time to think. I was a very happy person at the time, and there were a lot of things in my life that were very nice, but there was one part I wasn't completely happy about, and I've wanted to change that, and the sanding gave me a lot of time to think about this part of my life and how I'm going to fix it. And whenever there is something you want to change in your life, you most of the time have to make a sacrifice at another place, and I use the time to think about my priorities and what I want to change and how I'm going to change it. And not it does not always seem like you are going to find a solution, and which meant that this at times also was very frustrating, but I can report now I found a solution and I'm fine, so everything worked out. All the visible parts are finished now, and I need to make a slide-up frame for inside of my framing I've built. Since the slide-up frame is not going to be visible, I decided to use some leftover already milled boards I've had laying around. Some of it is maple from this project, and there is also some beechwood I've had left over from other projects. And I used those boards. Those were the most imperfect ones, so the ones with maybe some cracks, branches, or sometimes they get grayish, and I've used those because no one is going to see them anyway. You probably already know the process, but I cut them to rough width, and then I put them through the jointer again and then through the planer, because I still cannot cut any straight cuts lengthwise, which is the reason I've had to make this. I know this is so inefficient, but it's just how I've had to do it, because I wasn't able to make any straight cuts. Then I did cut all my parts to final length. All of those parts were quite straightforward, so there's not a lot to say. I just made a lot of different length wood strips and cut them to the measurements I needed. So one part of the slide-up frame needed a little cutout, and I've made this cutout on the benzo. I've planned this cutout in on my CAD model and then printed my plans out based on my CAD model, and now I've realized I didn't need to make those cutouts. They were completely unnecessary, and at the same time, this piece you see now is one of the weight-bearing parts of the slide frame or of the whole sofa, and I've realized it's a little thin. So I decided to glue 2 boards together and make a thicker and wider version of it. So yeah, I glued those boards together, cut them in half, so I needed two thick parts, and I've put them through the jointer, through the planer. I did everything again and rebuilt a thicker, more structurally sound version of it. For the slided frame, I've decided to screw it together because no one is going to see it, and screwing most of the time is a little easier than gluing. I've pre-drilled all the holes I could think of, which weren't all, if I'm remembering correctly. I forget some, but most of them I did. And I drilled them, then I made the countersink so the screws are going to lay flush. Especially on the part you are seeing here, it's important that the screw lays flush because this part is going to lay against another piece and the screws need to be flush to the surface. I pre-drilled the slates for the slated frame as well. For those, I've decided to make a little jig so I didn't have to mark every slate, and I didn't have to worry about the alignment of the drill to the markings. I just could put the slate into the jig, drill my hole, take it out, make the other side, which was very quick and easy. Of course, I've had to sand the slated frame as well. With those, I didn't sand them as perfectly as the other parts because they are not going to be seen, no one's going to touch them, but I did sand them quite smoothly because there is going to be upholstery on the slated frame and I certainly didn't want to get it ripped, so it is smooth, it is nice to touch, but it's not as perfect as the rest. It was time to assemble the slated frame. My boyfriend came in to help me. We've held all the parts in the right position and pre-drilled the holes, so they are going to fit later. Then we screwed in the screws, pre-drilled the other holes and repeated it on all four edges. Then it was time to attach the slates. We first calculated the distance between the slates and measured them out. Then we laid all the slates out and one of us was pre-drilling the holes and the other one was screwing in the screws, and this way the frame was assembled quite quickly. I've decided to put some feet on the sofa for two reasons. One is I wanted to protect the sofa as much as possible from the wet floors outdoors, and the other one is the floors are rarely perfectly even, and with the feet it's going to be adjustable to the unevenness. To install the feet, we first mark the middle of the leg, which is not where the two boards meet, as I was planing them afterwards and I planed them a little lopsided. Then we've drilled a 10mm hole up in the middle of the leg, in which we could then insert a threaded insert, and into the threaded insert we were able to screw our feet. Now it's time to assemble everything just to see if it fits. So what you see us doing here is screwing the outer framing piece onto the slated frame. For me, it was very important that the sofa is going to be easy to assemble and disassemble, just in case I'm going to move sometime in the future. For the next part of the assembly, we've made everything ready for the backrest. We've drilled in some holes for the connector bolts. My boyfriend made a little jig to make sure that all the holes are at the right distance. Because the jig was a little short, we've had to flip it to drill the last hole. And with the holes ready, we were able to screw in our connector bolts. With that, we were ready for final assembly. So all the steps we are taking here, we would also have to do when we want to move our sofa. The process is quite simple. We can put the slated frame onto the side piece and screw in all the screws. Then we can attach the backrest with the connector bolts and the extender screw and repeat the process for the other side. After the assembly, we disassembled everything and made it ready for finishing. And I'm going to talk to you about finishing in just a bit, but first I have to tell you about the disassembly. So when we were attaching the slated frame to the side pieces, I've busted a screw. And I didn't realize until this assembly, and it was very late, so I didn't film it, but we've had to cut the screw with the fine tool and then re-drill another hole and put in another screw right next to it. And I've just wanted to let you know that this happened. There are some burn marks where I've used the fine tool, but it's not going to be in a visible spot. So for the finishing, I went with an open pore wood glaze. I went with an open pore glaze because I thought it's going to be better if the wood can adapt to the moisture outdoors. And color-wise, I went with a transparent color. The transparent color does not protect the wood against graying, which is sad, but I really like the natural color of the wood and wanted to keep it. I do know this wood glaze, and I know it's very easy to reglaze everything with the same glaze, and if the wood gets grey, I can just stain it with the same wood glaze in a darker color. Process-wise, I first applied a thick coat of glaze and let it dry. I've waited a few days and then came back. Whenever I glaze something, the wood fibers tend to stand up and the surface is no longer smooth. So I had to sand everything with a high grit sandpaper and clean up all the dust, and afterwards it was ready for the second coat of glaze. I applied the second coat of glaze and waited a half an hour. After half an hour I was ready to clean off the excess glaze with a dry rag. And with that, the wooden part of the project is finished and we are ready for the sewing. For the upholstery, I've ordered some foam. The foam came already pre-cut to the right measurements, which was very nice. For the sitting pad, I used a 10 cm thick foam, which was quite firm, because I didn't want to sink too deep into the sofa. I've used the same firmness for the armrests, as the armrests are going to be able to fold down and be on one level with the sitting pad. I've wanted them to feel the same. The foam pads for the armrests are going to be 7 cm thick. And for the backrest, I ordered a 10 cm thick foam, which is less firm and a little bit more comfortable to lean against. The fabric choice wasn't easy. Ideally, I would have found a UV resistant upholstery fabric, but I didn't. In the shop I went, they had a lot of fabrics to choose from, but they've had upholstery fabrics for indoors from which they didn't know if they were UV resistant or not. Then they've had some UV resistant fabrics for sunshades, which also felt a little weird and had the classic sunshades color, and I didn't like that. So the lady and I decided to go with workwear fabric. So the fabric I am using here is actually fabric for work pants, and it is durable. It's a thick fabric. It's a lot cheaper than upholstery fabric. I don't know if it's UV resistant or not. Time will tell. I've bought a sofa cover which will protect it from most of the UV light, and we will see how it holds up. First, my boyfriend helped me to mark out everything, as this was a very time-consuming process and needed a lot of attention. And then I've cut out everything with the scissors. With all the parts cut out, it was time for sewing. So I'm going to show you what I did on this armrest pad. I didn't film everything because it was very boring and there are a lot of repeated processes, and I myself was watching a lot of movies during this time and I couldn't watch movies and film at the same time, so I didn't film that much, but I also felt like the footage was very boring. As you are seeing, I'm putting a zipper in so that I'm going to be able to wash the covers when they get dirty. What I did, I was putting right sides together, stitching down the zipper and ironing everything flat, and afterwards I was stitching the seam allowance down. I've made a strip of Velcro on it and I am going to attach it to the back side of the cover. This will make sure the cushions don't slide around and the armrests and the backrests are going to be secured to the sofa. Next, I attached all the side panels to the back panel. It was quite a simple process. I stitched down the side panels, ironed them flat and stitched down the seam allowance. I'm very sorry if I'm not narrating this very detailed, but I feel like I don't have a lot to say. It's a very simple process. Those covers are rectangles sewn together, so there is not a lot of intricate sewing needed. But this took me some time. My flat was a mess. There were like those little threads that are falling from the fabric and threads I cut off. They were everywhere and I didn't want to clean up because I'm going to make a mess anyway, and I was sewing in the evenings too. And why should I clean up a mess at 10 in the evening, go to work and come back just to sew again and make a mess again? So I just left the mess and lived with all the threads on the floor. With the side panels attached, it was time to close the edges. I closed the edges with a stitch, then I've ironed flat the seam allowance and stitched down the seam allowance so everything lies nice and flat even after a wash. Sewing is one of those hobbies who need a lot of patience, and I am not a very patient person, which means I usually only have the patience for one sewing project every 1 or 2 years, because the process is not as enjoyable when you are impatient. For this one, I've handled it quite well. I was surprised myself how well it went and how much I kept my nerves. For the armrest cover, there was only one thing left to do, and this is to sew the front side onto the cover. I wanted to show you something about the sitting pad. It is basically the same as the armrest cover, just bigger, and I've decided to put 2 zippers in so the foam can be easily inserted. But what I didn't think about is that the edge is still going to be attached when I put 2 zippers in, and one zipper is totally useless. I've left it and moved on. While I was fabric shopping, I also stumbled upon this nice floral fabric, and I didn't want to cover the whole sofa in this fabric because it was very busy and very expensive, but I've decided to make 2 cushions out of this nice fabric. For the pillows, I've only had to cut out 1 long panel per pillow. I did sew in a zipper into my pillow covers as I wanted them to be washable. I tried to iron the fabric a little bit over the zipper, so the zipper is going to be hidden even though it's not an inseam zipper, and it's going to be a little bit more comfortable to lay on. Then I've closed up the sides and was basically done with the pillow cover. Those covers, they were very easy to make, so I can recommend them if you're not very patient. And I can see myself doing other pillow covers as well if I find a nice fabric I want to use. And with that, we are basically done with this project. The only thing missing is to assemble everything. For the final assembly, I've got my brother to help me. Thank you for helping me. He is a carpenter, so he knows what he's doing, and I'm glad he helped me so I didn't mess anything up. Right now you see us attaching the front-facing framing part to the slatted frame. We did this again, this one fit perfectly. Then we attach the side panel to the slatted frame. The part which my brother is now screwing onto the side panel is actually the part I did twice because it wasn't thick enough, and I'm glad I did it because now the sofa is very stable, very solid, and I don't think it would have held up if this part would have been thinner. The only thing that I haven't pre-mounted yet was the armrests. So for the armrests, I am attaching them with hinges so they are foldable, and I can extend the sofa whenever I need more space to lay down. I went with 3 hinges per armrest to make it as stable as possible. It is not the most stable construction as there is no support under the armrest, but it's stable enough to put your feet on it, head on it, or lean against. But it's not, I wouldn't sit on it. For adjustment of the angle of the armrest, I went with a chain and some hooks. To mount the hooks, I decided to go with threaded inserts. This is the first time I used threaded inserts, and as soon as I put my first one in, the wood chipped and I panicked there. So I rushed inside, I found some super glue, stick the little chip down, realized it's not looking as good, and then I actually went home to my grandfather to the workshop just to grab the wood glue and came back with a toothpick and some wood glue and repaired my little chip. After that incident, I wasn't brave enough to install any more threaded inserts myself, so my boyfriend came to help me. What we've changed was we've widened the diameter of the hole I drilled. I've made a 9mm hole the first time, and now we are drilling a 10mm hole. And then we also used a screw and a ratchet to screw the threaded insert in, which also was way easier. This is the final result. So this is the wooden construction I've made, and I'm going to show you the upholstery later, but I'm very happy. It's very comfortable compared to no sofa, and it massively expanded the time I spend on my balcony, just because there is now somewhere comfortable to sit on if you want to chill and relax. If the weather is somewhat nice, I'm gonna go outside. I've also wanted to tell you that I really enjoyed the half a year where I could spend one day a week with my grandparents in the workshop, and I really appreciated them letting me use their workshop, all their tools and their resources. They provided the wood and a lot of other stuff, and I'm very grateful for that. And my grandmother, she also fed me. She gave me lunch once a week. She made tea and cookies, and I'm very grateful for them and the time they invested in me. And that's it. Thanks for watching.